Hi, I just want a very hi. I just want to do a very brief introduction to our research and writing project. Hopefully, just to kind of make you feel better about it and give you some background as to how I see this work developing over the rest of our semester. Um, the easiest way to kind of explain this, I think, is just to give you a little background about how I came to this point of view. So, um, I really liked doing research in college, and that's probably why I became a professor, right? Um, but I think I learned lots of different methods of how to conduct research, and that's what I liked the most. So maybe like you, when I kind of first started out, I didn't really like it because I thought there was only one way to do it, and I didn't really understand what the point was. A lot of time it seemed like I was just reading somebody else's work and then writing like a book report, and I didn't really find that to be very interesting. And a lot of times, you'd get like a B or something, you'd have no idea, like, why did I get a B? So when I started teaching, I decided that I didn't want to do that method. I wanted to try to be a little bit more inclusive and kind of think about, well, what are the things that students are interested in researching? And then compare that kind of what I'm researching and see if maybe we could do research together. Um, I think that's like the old saying, like the two heads are better than one. Well, like in a class, right, I have anywhere from 30 to 40 students. So that's 40 heads. So we could really actually make some progress in 13 weeks trying to find out more information. So when I started teaching at Kingsborough in 2010, I tried this out in the very first semester, and I was doing some research on an immigration case, and I had students conduct research with me, and I was really impressed with all the information that students were able to kind of bring and all their different perspectives. And that semester, I changed a lot of the ideas that I had and started looking at different aspects of the question. And so I really like that model where we're kind of researching something together because I think it makes it more interesting for everybody, and you get to do research that's interesting to you. Kind of each year after that, I started thinking about this from the point of view of competence, is that if you transfer in your third year, you're going to be doing a lot of research papers. And it's one thing I've been talking a lot to professors at John Jay about, and then students who have gone on to John Jay. I've asked them to send me the instructions that the professors give them, and I've looked at a lot of students' papers that they wrote at John Jay, and just to see what the difference is. And so I started kind of trying to put together an introduction to writing that can kind of get you prepared for that work that you're going to do later. So we're not going to do all of that stuff, but I'm going to get you kind of the basic building blocks of the things you need to know so that when you get there, it's not going to be like super difficult. It's always hard to write a paper. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's harder when you don't know what you're doing, right? And then even if you don't transfer, these skills are good about anything that you want to do. Like if you want to roast a chicken, if you wanted to find out how to set up a battery, there's things that you could do that have nothing to do with school, where research skills are really helpful, so that you kind of don't waste your time and you don't like go off onto unreliable sources. And then probably even better is that you kind of live in the world a bit easier, and it's a little easier to manage risk and whatnot. So the kind of research that if when you go to the library, you see that there's like literature section, there's the science section, right? So it's the same thing with like research. So there's lots of different types of research, and some of them, you do them quite a bit. Like one of them is called normative. You tend to do that in your literature courses, and a lot of actually introductory courses, they have you do normative, which is like, what do you think things should be, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in the social science world, especially within the Justice Academy, in political science and sociology, we mostly do critical research. So we kind of take some findings that people have found in the past, and we really like challenge those, and we see, okay, let's set up some experiments, let's set up some research designs, and see whether these statements are true. And not like to find the absolute truth, but just to say like, okay, this person said that this is the reason why young men between 26 and 30 are more likely to do this thing. So let's set up an experiment. Let's do some interviews. Let's look at the research and see whether that's accurate or if there might be other things going on. And this isn't to say that like the person who did the research before was lying. It's just that, if it's only one person or it's only like two or three people, when you have like 40 or 50 or 60 people looking at the same problem, you start to see things that one person could never see. So we call this empirical research, and the empirical research is really kind of based on two principles from my point of view. The first one is this concept of experience, right? So empirical research and radical empiricism is mostly based on this idea that you can't really do research about things that are quote unquote out there, right? You can only really do things that you can practically see, and that you can measure in like a really concrete way. Like there's things that you can really look at and have something to say about that. But we shouldn't spend too much time speculating about what could be or how we would want things to be, but rather just see like, well, how are things now? Like what are the things that exist that we can verify exist, and then what can we learn about that? And then the second thing I do that I kind of add into this idea is inductive, which is, a lot of times you do deductive work in class, and I don't think there's anything wrong with deductive work, but I think we do too much of it in college. So deductive is when you get like a research prompt, right? So they say, why is separation of powers theory important in political science? And then you go out, you find some articles where people talk about why it's important, and then you write about why it's important. But what about the question, is it important? Maybe it's not. And then some of the work I do, it's not even clear what separation of powers is. It depends on who you're even talking to, what theory you're looking at. People have radically different ideas about what that phrase even means. So inductive is like starting from the ground up. We say like, is this even an important question to begin with? What do we mean by this thing? Before we start assuming that this is a valid thing to research. So inductive is a nice way, I think, for introductory students to get involved, because you get to form your own inquiry questions. You get to think about what you think is important rather than just like somebody else telling you this is the thing you need to think is important. This also lets you get your voice in a lot more, which is really important in research. I think people, when they hear the word like be objective, people think that means that like you have nothing to say, but that doesn't really make any sense if you think about it, because you're the one doing the research, you're the one doing the writing, so you're always going to have something to say. You're always going to be biased, and bias isn't necessarily bad, right? Bias is just saying like, this is my point of view, this is my lived experience, and this is what I think. I think it'd be a lot better if everybody did that, because then at least we'd know where everybody's point of view is coming from. When we pretend to be neutral, I don't know who we think we're being. It's like pretending to be somebody else. That doesn't make any sense to me. So inductive research lets you kind of build on what you already know and really put your voice into the story. So the next level is like analysis. So the critical part is like half of it, and then the other half is analysis. So we have a critical position. We say, okay, let's see whether these statements are true. Let's see if this research is accurate. Let's see what we have to say about these social problems. But then we say, okay, now that we have all these like structures, right? We have institutions we can look at. We have experiments that we've conducted. We have surveys, right? We have all this information. Is there a pattern somewhere that we can look at? Is there something that keeps repeating itself, or is there a big difference that keeps standing out in the different forms of research that we can analyze and see like, okay, what's going on here? And so I use participatory methods. And so you're not just like researching something on a piece of paper, you're also looking at the world, right? You might be looking at culture. That was the first article we had, right? Was looking at a TV show. So how does this exist in the world? This allows us to participate in the research. Again, to show that we're not neutral, right? We're a part of society. We're doing the research. We designed the research experiment. So we might as well put ourselves in, and we're going to participate in this because we want to think about it from social change. And you can't change a social arrangement or society without changing yourself. Now, this is not the same thing as saying like you have to change yourself before society can change. I'm not saying that. That's one of those platitudes of religion. What I'm saying is, if you change your environment, if you change your bedroom, if you change your family situation, if you change your community, you are going to be changed. So let's not pretend that we're not going to, and that somehow we're standing outside of our family or we're standing outside of our bedroom, right? That doesn't make any sense. So we just want to really be thinking about how do we change during this process, and we'll call this reflection in our paper. And that's usually a phrase that people use. Like after we're done with this, we'll reflect and say, okay, how did our point of view change? The second part is this is what's called a narrative, right? So it's a story we tell about the world. It's a story we tell about ourselves. It's a story we tell about a story. And so that's what that first article that you read about CSI was looking at a narrative. What is the narrative that CSI tells to people who watch that show? And then how does that affect how they think about the world? That's what we're going to be doing as well, right? How do people think about the problems that we're going to research? So then this is really practical in the sense of democratic engagement. I don't think you really should engage with your democratic society. You shouldn't engage in politics unless you have done some thinking about it, right? You shouldn't just mindlessly follow somebody who says, build a wall, build a wall. It's like, build a wall for what, buddy? So I think like that's what you need to, this is what we mean by democratic engagement, is if you do critical analysis, then the democracy is going to be better, right? There's going to be more dialogue. There's going to be more thinking. It's not just people wandering around voting and volunteering and kind of like really basic level things. It's going to be like people actually trying to make the world a better place. And if you're not doing that, I'm not really sure what the point of democracy is then, and maybe I'm not really interested in it. Bring back the monarchy then. So I think like this idea of democratic engagement is really important for thinking people, right? And there's lots of quotes that you'll read as you kind of progress in your schooling that say things like, our democracy is only as good as the people, right? There's only so much we can do if people aren't, thinking about these big problems and they're just expecting somebody else to take care of it. So then this big action research kind of category that we're doing, right? We're doing research, and I spelled research wrong, I see there, so research, right? We're doing research, though, in action, right? So this is like research that's going to be used for something, and this is part of the class that we're doing is called Open Education, and that's so we're not just throwing away your assignments. So if you see on like that lower right-hand side, like I've used student work ever since 2010 to feed into my research, into public research, and then into more research for students. And so we're kind of all working on this together, and we're trying to better understand how social change could actually work. And then because my background is in law and you're in a law class, right, we're thinking about law as the mechanism for social change, right, as the tool for social change. So we're going to be looking specifically at actors who are trying to use the law to make this change. Now, this is somewhat easy, right, because you may not have known, but the UN Sustainability Goals are based on international law. They're based on human rights law. And because it's a relatively new thing, right, it just kind of came up in 2015, and then the human rights are only since the 1940s, 1950s. That's, the law, there's lots of laws, right, there's lots of written agreements. There's lots of conversations about it, but it's not as old as other things, right? So we have a relatively young body of law that we can look at and we can see, okay, what are the tools within that conversation? So I call this kind of whole thing like a remix, right? This is like my way of doing research. There's other people that I've learned this from. Michael McCann is one of them. Margaret Levy is another. There's Patricia Hill Collins does work like this. But it's kind of taking like the tools available to us and applying it for a good reason. So the sections of your paper are pretty straightforward. And this is pretty standard if you see on the right-hand side. There's usually an introduction. And this, sometimes an introduction like you saw in the CSI article is only like a paragraph or two. But sometimes, you have a really great introduction. It needs to be a page or two. If that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. You're sharing your drafts with me on Google Drive. So if you have like 6 pages on your introduction, I might, put a comment in there saying like, I think maybe we should turn, page 4 into something else. Maybe it's not an introduction anymore. But that's probably not going to happen. I'm just saying like, don't feel like you have to write like a specific number of pages for the introduction. Like your introduction will be as long as you need it to be. And then probably a really short section will be the inquiry question, because this is just going to be like, what is the injustice you're looking at? What is the thing that you think is important to study? Some of you will look at something that's kind of complicated, but some of you will look at something really simple. So the simple one probably wouldn't need to be even more than like 2 or 3 sentences. So don't feel bad like if you're saying, oh, I don't have it, it's not long enough. The next section might be kind of long, right? Because a lot of this will be applying the coursework that we're doing, the readings that we're applying, and some of the information I'm giving you, which is the thesis and the theory of social change. Now, the thesis will probably only be a paragraph. and you're going to do that assignment in, I think, a week or so, April 1st. So that's not going to be, a huge amount of work. Now, I think it's hard because you have to think about it. You're like, what do I think is the main thing going on here? And then the theory of social change is like a thing that you're pretty used to, right? You read an article or you read some information or you do some research, and then so what? Like, what was the big deal of reading that thing? And so you're going to put that theory, and I'm going to really help you with that part because that's one of the hardest parts for anyone to do, any human to do, is to do theory building. So we'll work on that together, but we just want to keep in mind, I want you to get in the habit of thinking about social change, right? So what's the mechanism, what's the tool that we can use in law to make social change? And then we want to really apply that to this idea that I gave you at the beginning about actor networks. And you all did a really good job of identifying the actors within your network, in your neighborhood. And so we're going to apply that same kind of thinking, but now we're going to think about, okay, we have actors in the courts, right? We have lawyers, we have judges, we have researchers, we have actors within government institutions. So the legislature, Congress, New York City Council, right? New York State, right? You have all these different people who have different skill sets, and then they have different trainings they need, and then there's different trainings they can provide. It's interesting watching Governor Cuomo right now give his talks kind of every day, because I think he seems like he'd be an okay teacher. That's kind of how he seems to be delivering this information. It doesn't seem super political. He doesn't have like a lot of sound bites. He's got slides and presentation. It seems like we're in class, right? It's like good class with Governor Cuomo. So it's interesting, right? Because that's a training he's providing to people to help them through this pandemic. So it's interesting how different actors can use their skills in trying to make change. And then we'll think about community-based organizations and who are those players, right? Is that religious leaders? Is that you, volunteers, just different groups of people who are trying to work with these other actors in the network, and how are they doing? And that'll be the kind of the bulk of the paper. Then we'll do some research, and we'll do at different levels of research. So you might do interviews, you might look at movies, right? You might analyze songs, you might look at statistics. It kind of depends on what you're comfortable with and what you ask. Like, what's the question that you ask? It'll kind of determine. I'll help you with that. But then we'll also do some standard academic research, using a search engine I'm going to show you called JSTOR, but you can also use Google Scholar. I think in this day and age, you can probably use YouTube. And then I'll try to help you see like what are sources that are reliable, and then what are sources that are pure madness. Sometimes it's hard to tell. That's the hard part. And then we're going to apply the course materials. So I didn't give you a lot of readings. So we're going to just apply those very specifically, right? So it's not like you're going to be searching through an entire textbook looking for information. There's going to be very specific stuff. So if you think about the CSI article, that one's going to be pretty easy to apply because it was really about how does a narrative, how does a story affect the way that people think about a social problem. And there you'll remember that was all about wishful thinking. So if you want to solve a social problem, wishful thinking is not going to be a very good way of trying to get people to behave. They're mostly going to think that somebody else is going to solve this problem, right? There's somebody else out there that's an expert. They're going to solve this problem. I don't need to do anything. Well, that's never going to work. So, we have to try to think about, okay, so then some of another reading that we'll read would be, okay, what does the court do about this, right? So if you think the court's going to solve this problem, well, let's look and see what the court has to say. You're going to see that the court doesn't have much to say about how to solve problems. It has more to say about what are the rules of the game. And that's really what this course ends up being about, is like, what are the rules of the game in law, and how do people use them to their advantage, and then how do people use them to make social change? And then finally, we're going to reflect, and this is called learning in pieces or knowledge in pieces. And so we're going to think, like, how did this approach to breaking down each kind of section and applying the rules, cases, social science research, how did this kind of help us think about how law can participate? That's kind of a weird way of saying it. How can I participate, or how can humans participate using law as a tool for social justice? That's what we're really going to think about. And that's my research. That's what I do. And I work with other people to do that research. So I'll probably be sharing information that I'm finding out about as I do my work. And and share that information with you, and you can certainly use that. You can cite to me or not. I don't, I won't be offended if you, if you don't cite to me. I think it's a good thing that we're thinking about this question. You'll have to cite to the course readings, but I'll show you how to do that. But in general, we're all going to make this, progress together. So I just wanted to show you, here's a picture of the sustainability goals. So you could think about it this way, right? These are 17 problems. These are 17 things that could be studied. These are 17 situations in which there's inequity or there's injustice. So, which thing is super interesting to you? It does not matter to me which of these things you think about. Some people really care a lot about poverty and economic issues. Other people really care about the environment. Other people be really specific about what they think about the environment, right? It'll be on land or it'll be below water. If you're really interested in like due process, or wrongful conviction, things like that, that'd be number 16. So there's lots of, in racism, that would be number 10, right? So there's lots of different issues that you could think about. And the kind of point of using this is that we have lots of resources here, right? So this is a good place for you to start, to just look at, so what's been done so far as of 2019. And that will help you see kind of like what could be done, here in Brooklyn or in, New York City generally. And so you'd go to this website and just like poke around, right? And see what interests you. You could be interested in 2 or 3 things. It'd be easier if you picked one, but I could, if you want, you could do more than one. We could compare and contrast those, but it'll be a little bit harder, so let's be honest about that. It's up to you whether you want to give yourself more work. But if you have time and you think that you can do it, I'm all for it. So finally, I just want to give you a big, broad overview. So, this is from our website, on the side to the two to the left. So, just if you haven't had a chance yet, watch the 2 videos. So the first video is just a very brief introduction into what are these goals, why do they matter? And then the second one is like, what are we doing, basically? This is a theory, not really a theory, it's a method called open educational resources. This is why you didn't have to buy a textbook in this class. But it's also going to something a little bit different than what you do in other classes, and it was intentionally this way. I'm part of a fellowship program with a colleague of mine, Dr. Shauna Brandel from Political Science, and she's really helping us think about open education, which is co-constructed knowledge. So we're creating knowledge together and getting rid of these kind of what they call disposable or garbage assignments, right? Where you just like take a test and then it goes into the garbage and nobody really cares, right? So we're producing information and knowledge that is useful for other people, and that's what open education is. And then I show you, like, I just wanted you to see how everything kind of connects. You have your required readings, you have the grading, and then you have the paper. So all this stuff is going to connect. This isn't stuff that like I do it and it's busy work. It's all broken down into pieces. So the next work you're going to do is the brainstorm and then the thesis statement. And you'll see the dates. I tried to put those in red. The stuff in blue is like stuff we've already done. The stuff in green is like it's in the future, so you don't have to stress about it right now. But you'll kind of see we've done some work. We have some work to do. And then what I need you to start thinking about is like you're going to do 2 types of research. One is like very active research that you're going to do. You're probably not going to do it outside, given the situation. But there's different ways of conducting field research. And then you're going to do traditional academic research. And again, I think you should use this search tool called JSTOR. I'll show you how to do that. It's on the Kingsborough Library website. But you could also just go straight to the American Bar Association. And also, I think there's American Bar Foundation is another website. And then the publisher is called Wiley that does both of those. And they have Law and Society Review, a bunch of different kind of law-related journals, so you could kind of get information from them. And then finally, I just want to remind you that this is college, so we're doing Bloom's taxonomy. A lot of the classwork that you did when you first started was all about remembering things, right? But now that we get into the 60s, right, we're in the 66, 67, and even really I think 64. Especially with Professors Barnaby and Trotman, we're starting to get into the understanding and applying our information so that we're getting you ready to analyze information. Sometimes we'll have you analyze information as just like a way to practice, and that's what we're going to do in this class. So I'm not going to grade you harshly on your ability to analyze. I will grade you on how are you moving from remembering to understanding to applying, right? Because that's kind of a process you need to go through. So when you transfer, you can do analysis. And analysis is a goal that we have in the criminal justice program and in the liberal arts program. So we want you to be able to do analysis by the time you graduate from Kingsborough. So I wanted to kind of like push you that way, but again, not to grade you harshly. So I hope this kind of makes you feel a little bit better. We're in this together. We're studying big social problems. We're going to try to take big global problems and bring them down to the local level. This is the research I get paid to do, so I hope you feel comfortable and trust me that I know what I'm doing. I've been using this method of teaching writing in writing intensive courses and in standard courses for, I guess about 10 years now. So, this is a process that's a little bit different than what you're used to, but it's a process that I found to work, every semester with every student. So I think it's a safe way of doing writing. It might feel a little slow at first, but I think you come out with a much better paper. And that's really the goal. I want you to have something that you can take with you somewhere else, right? It could be to a scholarship application. It could be you take with you you never know. Like 6 years from now, you might have a job and they say, what do you know about, blah, blah, blah. And you say, well, actually, I wrote a paper on that. And if you think that's a joke, I mean, I've heard people say that. So it's pretty interesting that it works out that way. So I really want this to be something that you're proud of. And that you'd want to share with people, and then certainly I'm going to learn things from you because this is how learning works. So I hope you're feeling good about this paper, and I hope your other classes are going well as well. So stay